That's some of the limitations of the NHS. It has to be the only country you go to where food and items are given for free. BMI has limitations.
Hi, my name's Hunter. I will be your host today on the Another Angle podcast. I'm here with Dr. Mody today. He is the CO Physician Executive at HCC. We'll be chatting all things semaglutides, international relations regarding healthcare, GLP-1 products, all of the above. Thank you very much for coming in today. I understand that you came from around Wembley areas, so it's reasonably close by to Hammersmith. And we're very thankful and very interested to kind of get stuck into these conversations. I feel like this is the first time that we've brought someone more on the business side of the medications industry. So it's I'll be really interested to get stuck into it, to be honest. So I think kind of kicking things off, it'd be really great to get a bit of context on your background within, especially the GLP-1 industry, and understand, I guess, your influence on the UK market, and I guess just, give us a rundown on your experience over the years.
Over the years, we've primarily been concerned with what we used to call medical tourism in healthcare concierge and consulting. This has led us to consulting internationally on various matters of healthcare administration, distribution of medications, but more importantly, what's been of interest internationally is the UK governance and the regulatory mechanisms that go behind not just prescribing, but also client care, so patient care specifically. We've evolved over the years where we're a little bit more concerned with value-based healthcare over the medical tourism aspect. By that I mean we have a very high concentration of specialists in London. The specialists in the private sector are mostly in the Harley Street area. Now, Harley Street is internationally known for having the highest concentration of fellows of the Royal Colleges than anywhere in the world. We utilise this level of expertise in order to produce what we call second opinions. This is specifically where the inquiries have come in for weight management. So individuals who have previously been unsuccessful with managing their weight, this has led them to seek second opinions, and they have made inquiries to us, which we've then managed using our multidisciplinary team. And more interestingly, in recent months, we've developed the inter- and transdisciplinary team as well, which not just involves the allied healthcare professionals, along with the various consultants, but also the patient itself. So we find that being more in tune with their journey and understanding what solutions that they're looking for, we're able to produce a bespoke weight management plan.
Right, so you really come in as that, I guess, authority or that group of medical experts that can understand a patient's situation and go, we're going to give you a step-by-step actionable plan in order to take control of your life. Essentially, that's what you're here for, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Some of the limitations in the practice of medicine involve the diagnoses that we see under the DSM. What we've found is that the DSM is culturally uninformed. So this has various repercussions in terms of understanding why various lifestyle choices have led to weight gain. So some of them can be deliberate and some of them not deliberate. But either way, it takes a very good history taking in order for us to truly understand how best to find the bespoke solution for a client/patient.
Definitely. So you touched on obviously those lifestyle implications and how that affects people's weight. Do you think there's anything specific about the UK demographic itself that might impact obviously those obesity numbers? I mean, I'm not sure what they are specifically at the moment, but they're relatively high on a global scale. So what do you think from a British perspective, what are people doing that might be increasing those numbers?
I think one of the main factors to consider is the cost of living crisis. Okay. This has impacted every socioeconomic group in the UK and every demographic, including the diaspora of other international communities. Now, where I'm specifically alluding to in this matter is the quality of food that's eaten. So a lot of the food that we receive is very much nutrient deficient. What I'm specifically referring to is the microbiome. I had a very interesting meeting last night where this was being discussed, where some insights were offered, and it very much alludes to the DNA finger prick, if you like, of an individual and their microbiome, and how that can be an identifying characteristic. What fascinated me about the conversation which came about was how unique an individual's biome was to that specific person, given their lifestyle choices, the food that they eat, the quality of food that they eat, and then how that has repercussions on their health when looking at them holistically.
Amazing. Okay, well, so we've touched on the obesity rates in the UK. I know you've obviously got some experience internationally as well over your long career. I've seen that. I think you've been in, Singapore, India. What other countries have you operated out of?
Absolutely. So we just had a conference 2 days ago with one of our colleagues in the Cayman Islands, where we're discussing obesity, and that's certainly become prevalent over there. There's a lot of reasons that all of this is. It's not just the knock-on effect from corporate and some of the trends that we're seeing in the United States. It's certainly something of concern, but what really intrigued me was the age of patients who are making inquiries. Younger and younger across the spectrum, both genders, and some real concern with regards to what their BMI is showing when they've calculated it using various online mechanisms.
Interesting. So that rising rate, obviously, we see it as well. It's very clear that there is a trend with these GLP-1 products, and people are taking action in that sense. Do you think it's down to kind of that public awareness side is raising, or do you think people are seeing no other solution?
I think it's a combination of both. It's an interesting question which you've raised. What I've found also is health technology has increased the aspect of monitoring one's health. So various apps are now available where individuals are taking ownership of their health, and they're using healthcare technology in order to not just monitor themselves, but some of them receive various rewards for it, which is incentivize them.
Okay.
The rewards are one particular insurance company in the UK who rewards you for your physical activity. And I personally participate in
I mean, it's fair enough. It's for insurance.
Absolutely. It's like a target. So I feel like I'm competing with myself. So where, I'm one of these individuals that I get bored very quickly with various activities. So I'll engage and I'll participate in them, where I found that, the most interesting slogan was probably by the company Nike, where they said, just do it. So I don't think it matters what you do. It's a case of just doing it. So where this awareness, which you raised in the question, comes from, I think it's been consolidated by this metrics that they're seeing on their own apps, on their iPhone, where they're then being rewarded for it, so they're incentivized. But also it provides the incentive to maybe try some new sports and to see how that will impact what they're trying to achieve. So personally, I've decided that I've never surfed before.
Right.
And I've seen it on television. I watched a few of these series from the 80s, Baywatch. I don't know if you remember that.
I know Baywatch, yeah.
It's fantastic to watch on a grey, gloomy London day. But, more relevant to the conversation is that I'm now preparing myself to go surfing, which
So
I'll be doing.
Picked up a board now, is what I'm hearing.
And also the core strength. So I've been monitoring my steps. I've been working on my core strength.
Yeah.
And I've been monitoring this using an app on my phone.
Okay.
So I think that, if I was to do a clinical trial on self in this particular situation, I think that, my thinking is very much on par with any other individual with an app and a phone,
Right.
who then's able to monitor it and able to share that information with friends and family, where, you find yourself maybe showing off a little bit. Well, look how much I ran today, or look how much I swam today.
Yeah.
But the point being is that, we've got a greater engagement and participation. We call this clinically patient activation.
Okay.
So patient activation ties very much in modern day thinking in terms of how treatment plans are made by clinicians. I specifically refer to joint decision making. A joint decision making really facilitates a greater amount of compliance and adherence to a management schedule that's been put in place with their primary care physician. This leads me to tie into the relationship with their primary care physician, where I think that a lot of the lifestyle changes, the weight loss management solutions, if we were to consider it holistically, the primary care physician will certainly be able to provide that level of direction and reassurance that it's all within healthy limits.
Healthy limits. Interesting. Okay. I mean, those are some amazing points you bring up, to be fair. Obviously, it covers that broad sweep, and I think that access to technology that everyone has at the moment, like I've just picked up a watch recently that just tracks all of my heart rate, all of my sleep performance, and I wouldn't have had a clue about it previously, and now that I do have it on my wrist, I find myself constantly checking it, like it's so interesting to just have that full overview on your health. And I think that's something that obviously people are gaining access to, but I think I was trying to tie into, I think where people are becoming more hyper aware of that, they also might be becoming more hyper aware of the fact that they might be a little limited in their options. If they are, lifestyle wise, they're unable to kind of get over that hill per se. I think it seems like people are just taking that supposedly easier option and taking the medication. So I think where I'm trying to lead to, so I think we touched on before we came into the session about the differences between America's views on these medications. Obviously, it's no secret to anyone that Ozempic's been quite a large topic of conversation in the States. Do you think that attitude is being reflected into the UK, or do you see some significant differences between the two?
I went to medical school in the States,
Yeah.
so I'm familiar with it. I did clinical rotations all over, up and down the East Coast. I also studied for my master's in the States, so
Yeah.
I'm quite familiar with how treatment looks in the States, how diagnosis is made, and how care is delivered. There is a lot that we can learn from how the Americans have progressed with various treatment options. I have taken clients from the UK over to the States for medical treatment, specifically for the reason that some of the surgical solutions which were then administered were not available in the UK. Also, they're a lot better versed at handling obesity in the UK than we are here.
Okay.
They've seen a larger volume of patients who are at that range of, a BMI above 35 or even higher. So they've got various mechanisms that have been put in place to be able to utilize that level of expertise in order to give a better quality of care.
Interesting. So you think it's more or less down to the fact that they've obviously been dealing with that type of core lifestyle in their culture, that they've had a lot more time to kind of deal with those issues, is what I'm hearing.
Many years ago, it must have been about 25 years ago, I was listening to the radio in the States, and it was a talk show. And the talk show was interesting because an individual was being interviewed, much like we're talking now. And he just couldn't get over some of the benefits of being in the States on coming from Cuba. And my ears pricked up a little bit as somebody who's a Brit and that was in the States, because there was certain parallels that he drew, and his articulation and his perception was something of interest to me. But what really I found astounding was when he mentioned that the United States, he said, it has to be the only country you go to where food and items are given for free. So, of course, I really started listening at the time to the radio, and I thought, what's he talking about, free? And then he said, oh, yeah, absolutely, it's free. And then he went on and he embellished on it, and he said, buy two, get one free. Buy one, get second one half price. Buy two sandwiches, get third half price.
Right.
And I almost felt a little bit of guilt because I myself saw this as better value, and I myself was inviting my own level of obesity, which was growing at the time, from eating more because I thought I was getting more value.
Yeah.
Now, of course, being in medical school at the time, I was convinced that the 10 kilograms that I put on weight was all muscle. And that was also at the same time where I convinced myself, which I still believe I have, is exercise-induced asthma.
Right.
when of course that's not the case.
Yeah.
But the lifestyle choices are also as a result of the environment which we live in.
For sure.
So this quantity of consumption and consumerism is also driving this obesity. In the UK, we do not get as much free food readily available. But I think what we do need to be a little bit mindful of is some of the food that's portrayed as being healthier, in terms of covering, some of the nutrition might not necessarily be so that may not be the case. So that's where I give reference to what I learned in the lecture that I attended yesterday evening, which considered the microbiome. So it wasn't really looking at calories, it was looking at the effect this would have on an individual's microbiome, which I thought was a very interesting perspective to place in correlation to obesity and how we've got to where we are now. In order to understand that, I think that's very important to then be able to provide those solutions, lifestyle-based, and the lifestyle changes that would then be beneficial in managing an individual who's presenting with obesity.
Interesting. Yeah. So obviously talking on like that patient by patient circumstance, right? Because I guess from my perspective, kind of outside looking in, like I've been larger, I've lost weight before, I've kind of done all the fluctuations, and my perspective from before I came here, I think I was a bit naive when it came to these medications. Now I've got an understanding on their place in the environment, but in my headspace, it was just like calories in, calories out, like that was all that mattered. But obviously you talk about these microbiomes, like it obviously has a difference in individuals, it comes down to them really.
Exactly. So each individual is on a case-by-case basis. It's not a case of, one medication is used for all. In medicine, we consider what we call therapeutic benefit. So there are side effects, as there always are with using medication. One of the points for consideration is that when an individual, if they were to come off the medication, how quickly would they see their weight then increase? So this is related to appetite. One thing I did find in some of my research on this topic was in terms of an individual's morale and motivation, how that changes when an individual loses weight. That then leads to a greater increase and participation in physical activity. So, though we're advocating individuals to do the 10,000 steps a day and to, burn X amount of calories and then to be mindful of what they're eating in terms of the calorie counting, I think that it becomes a little bit easier to then maintain that when you come off the medication once you've developed new habits.
Definitely.
Generally speaking, it takes, 3 months or, 90 days, however it's viewed, to break a habit and to change lifestyle. But to make lifestyle changes, that's of benefit to an individual for when they then come off the medication, where they've then created a whole new life for themselves from being able to participate in activity that they previously were unable to or had a lower amount of motivation to. So this goes back to what I mentioned at the start with access to healthcare, where an individual who presents with disability is of particular interest to me. So disability has always been one of my special interests. And, for an individual who's disabled, who has reduced mobility, or they have various mobility limitations or restrictions, I think that for an individual such as in that category, it very much is a bespoke case management for best outcomes. So we would have what we call a best outcomes meeting in order to determine what would be the most viable solutions and, what are the targets that we're looking for that are realistic.
Interesting. God, I mean, I'm learning a lot here, to be honest. I mean, it's really nice kind of seeing it from that clinical perspective as well. I think kind of touching on that clinical side, obviously, we chat about all of the great things that you guys do for these specific patients. I think talking on, I guess, people gaining access to these medications, obviously there's a lot of online pharmacies out there. Obviously, we're going to be angling towards right-angled as well. But I think understanding the importance of the relationships between the clinics and these pharmacies, how do you see, where does the importance lie when it comes to those relationships?
I was just recently at Arab Health in Dubai, and it was quite fascinating because the pharmaceuticals, of course, we're all very familiar with what goes on in drug development, but the dispensing part is what I wish to mention at this time, where the private healthcare sector is quite innovative in this, in that, a friend of mine, he's just purchased at a cost of just over £200,000, a robot to do the dispensing into Dorset boxes and, to be able to dispense the medication. So I think that some of these innovative solutions which we're seeing using technology and robots in particular are a lot faster in accepting and, moving to transition in the private sector. Small business has always sought these type of solutions because the cost of overhead impacts the efficiency of the business in a much bigger way. Of course, in time, this can then be cross-fertilized to the public sector. But where your question arises from, where clinics, right-angled and, the dispensing of medication, I think that using these innovative solutions allows for the dispensing of medication, but also the distribution. Now, this is quite fascinating because I attended a meeting, it must have been about 10 years ago, where they were looking for solutions in order to deliver ORS internationally. ORS is oral rehydration salts. So these are for individuals who are dehydrated. And they found that the company Coca-Cola had superb distribution throughout the world, where you would be able to buy the bottles of Coca-Cola, Fanta, I think Fanta's under Coca-Cola as well. And they were able to get it to all these far-reaching places, where there may not be a road network, so on and so forth. So the individual was innovative enough to develop an oral rehydration salt that could then be placed in between the two bottles.
Yeah.
So it fit quite nicely on top. So wherever the bottles could be distributed, he could then get the reach for his oral rehydration salt, which was a humanitarian effort in order to have this. But I thought that was an innovation at its best. It was something that the small business, private sector would be incentivized to develop. And it was a solution that simply worked. So I think that, using robots, using technology, using these apps, if it works, carry on.
Absolutely.
Why not? So I do think that there's a place for the public-private sector to fill these gaps.
Amazing. I mean, absolutely. It sounds like that crossover is really pivotal, right? Like it seems like it's essential for the way forward. I guess just getting an understanding on where you see healthcare developing in the years to come. I mean, I know that you're very involved in like international, conferences and all that kind of diplomacy as well, especially within the healthcare sector. I mean, it'd be a really great insight if you do have any, I guess, intel on how that scope looks for the next 5-10 years.
I think post-pandemic, we've all appreciated how international healthcare is. I think this has led to the patient being simply more aware of their own health status and taking ownership of their own health. whether you got vaccinated or not, you had the choice. I think that some of the vaccination programs that were put out by the UK and other countries is very impressive, but that showed the power of government and what government can do at a time of a pandemic by simply working together and having these initiatives that have value in improving the quality of life for individuals. I think moving forward, we're going to see more of international governance. There has been some concerns with medical tourism, with the governance and regulation that goes behind some of the treatment plans that have been administered, simply in the case of commercialization. So this is quite unethical in healthcare. What's interesting is, I believe it was on the 23rd of July 2024, the MHRA in the UK approved these medications for weight loss for cardioprotection. And I think that's a point to mention, because the authenticity, the regulation and the governance that the MHRA deploy with their primary interest being in patient safety gave that reassurance to the public that the medication can be used in this particular application prescribed by consultant cardiologists. In terms of getting the distribution and the dispensing, that's where the private sector was able to support. And the end result has been patients can be very well managed and then monitored through their primary care physician. In right-angled, we also send out letters to each patient's GP. So their GP is always kept aware of what's going on, and they can make decisions on treatment plans, whether an individual is using multiple medications to manage their cardiovascular health or their cardiac profile, as we call it. But it's coordinated care. It's well informed, but there isn't this friction between the public and private. It's
I think that's
truly
what I was going to touch on,
in terms of what would often be seen as an either or. We're seeing more of the two work together. I did note, whilst living in the States, that individuals were more accepting of purchasing their own supplements. So the nutritional supplement industry is certainly much larger in the United States as it is in the UK. I think that in terms of an individual then focusing on preventative healthcare, we are seeing more in the UK. So we're not necessarily waiting for the diagnosis of diabetes to then be given to a patient. And I think that's some of the limitations of the NHS, in that some of the criteria to be treated is that a clinical threshold needs to be reached. In the States, for example, they treat pre-diabetes in a different way to where it's treated in the UK, because it's seen as the trajectory of the disease. With any disease, the quicker you get to it, the better. There's no question about that. Prevention, as we say, is always better than cure. So in terms of some of the trends of, as you mentioned earlier, with the US and the UK, I have seen individuals in the UK certainly more interested in prevention, but also this is where the private healthcare, the private healthcare sector can support in a bigger way. So it's not just second opinions, but it's for preventative directives, which is all then fed in to their NHS GP, which every individual in the UK is entitled to.
I mean, it sounds pretty cohesive, like it's a very holistic service, right? And I think that's where everyone benefits, right? Like obviously the clinics, the pharmacies, the actual patients as well. I think that's the real goal here, right? So I know that you briefly touched on obviously the GLP-1 products. I think it's Wegovy, right? That's just been passed by the MHRA with cardiovascular benefits. So let's just say when you do have these patients kind of walking through the door with these issues, like if you can just break it down into slightly more layman's terms, these like semaglutides, like how do they really benefit these people?
Okay, firstly, there's always an assessment that's made from a clinical standpoint. So this is the clinical decision making in order to understand whether to escalate or to de-escalate, in some cases, clinical resources. So we call this a scale and pace model. So it's a case of understanding what's then going to be of therapeutic benefit. Often individuals who are presenting with complex disease involving multiple systems, multiple organs, such as diabetes, it would take various specialists in order to, really put that plan together, which the GP would then oversee. So really it would start with an individual having an assessment clinically, and then the primary care physician, he would then care coordinate for that particular individual. But I think what's of more important in this conversation is the monitoring that then takes place then after. So there's various aspects why monitoring can be important. Either the medication needs to be altered, amended, reduced or increased.
Yeah.
There could also be an issue with compliance. The biggest limitation to any healthcare solution that's been given in the clinical sphere is the compliance of the individual. So there's many factors that affect an individual's compliance, but it's only by monitoring do we really know how compliant they are. So it's not just a case of giving the medication or selling it like it is a nutritional supplement. That's not the case at all. This is first assessed where clinical thresholds are considered. The dosages is then given as part of clinical judgment. It's then monitored using the patient, and some of their apps that they're using that we talked extensively on are supportive to their primary care physician to understanding. And then the lifestyle changes are discussed en route as well, in order for an individual to have that level of quality of life that they deserve and that they're
seeking,
looking for.
right? That's what they need. Yeah.
So it's not just a case of, you would see with nutritional supplements where it's sold and then, over the counter, and then, that's the end of the journey, if you like. It's this is monitored in a clinical setting.
I mean, that's obviously great to hear. I'm sure there's a lot of satisfaction in knowing that, especially with potential clients. I mean, patients rather, in that manner. So I think, just slightly touching on obviously the semaglutide space, because it's topical. I think understanding on how these medications are going to be included within like cardiology practices. Like how do you see that evolving moving forward? Obviously, with that backing from the MHRA.
Cardiology has always been fascinating for me because in the UK, it's very difficult to get cardiac screening done if you're presenting with no symptoms. So that is not an escalating factor to get the opinion of a cardiologist under the NHS. So you can't, for example, go to your cardiologist tomorrow and say, under the NHS, could I have a heart check? What symptoms have you got? None, but I'd just like to get it checked. That's not something that the NHS is suited for. We're seeing more and more individuals going to the private sector for cardiac screening. So I think it's for the cardiologist to then identify the patients who are candidates for the medication, and then who would then benefit from the cardioprotective profile that's being offered, to then make that assessment and then give those suggestions to that patient, and then work together with the patient in order to reach that solution.
I mean, that's obviously brilliant to hear. I think the summary of this kind of conversation where I'm trying to get to is that obviously, public awareness is really being raised with all this GLP-1 medications. And I think having more and more medical insights backing their use, and that there is significant benefit for the wider public, I think it's really important. And it means obviously it's getting the right medication out to the right people. So I think, how do you see the evolution of these products going down the years? Like, do you have any insights on new medications that might be coming into the framework over time? Or, what kind of trajectory do you see here?
Absolutely. I definitely see this increasing. I think more and more people will be interested in having an executive health check where some of the concerns that they may have with regards to their cardiovascular health would then be discussed. I think that individuals are better informed as to the health status of their family members to know if they themselves are presenting with the similar genetic risks. So I think genetic screening will also increase. I think this medication will be used with a different threshold moving forward. So once it's been established an individual has a genetic predisposition, that's where I think it will be very interesting to see how it will prevent that particular abnormality being expressed by treating it very early. So once it's been established through a genetic profile, that would be, I think, the future. And we call this personalised or precision medicine. We have had a lot of interest internationally for personalised and precision healthcare, especially from the Swiss. That's something, maybe precision is something which they're very interested in itself, but the absolute personalised care where genetic screening will come in, where, maybe we start using some of the medication at lower clinical thresholds, knowing what the clinical trajectory may be, and maybe give some advisement for lifestyle changes before somebody reaches those levels of obesity, which are of concern clinically.
Definitely. I mean, I think you kind of took my next question out of my mouth, to be fair, because if we were to become a lot more refined with these genetic insights, I mean, I've lightly touched on it previously with Actual Right Angle themselves. Obviously, we're promoting these DNA and genetics testing kits, which are phenomenal. I did one the other week. I found out a lot of things that I wouldn't have really thought I was going to be susceptible to. But I think having that confidence in knowing where your genetic coding lies and what you can do about it in a preventative manner is something really important for a lot of people, right? And I think you touching on the fact that there are potential preventative measures that we can put in place. Do you think that, let's say that BMI threshold currently sits at 30 at the moment, obviously this is meeting people at the point where they are considered obese. Obviously you've mentioned the fact that this might be changing. Do you see that reducing over time now that these medications are becoming more viable for people?
I think BMI has limitations. It gives a good guide. So it gives us an idea as to the health status of an individual. Some of the limitations may include, such as my case where I put on the 10 kilograms, it was all muscle.
All muscle, fair enough.
Bone density, certain individuals and certain ethnic groups have a much higher level of bone density. We are seeing individuals who are getting this measured now. So whenever patients come to us in an executive health check, that's one of the questions which they always inquire about. They say, can I have this scan in order to ascertain whether or not I'm likely to have a fracture or osteoporosis or something, related. I do think that, in terms of the individual being more discerning and having more clinical discernment, we'll see more of as technology provides us with a calibration and metrics of health that go beyond just the number of that BMI gives.
Right.
And I think that that's important. I know the NHS have rolled out various programs looking at cardiac age. So you can put in some information into the website and it'll give you an idea of what your cardiac age is.
I think I've heard about this before.
It's very good. I think President Obama had one of the greatest initiatives when he was in office, where he said to the individuals in America, I understand you're all going to be meeting up over Thanksgiving, which is traditional to meet up with your family. But he said, but at the same time, why don't you make some inquiries as to their health status and fill it into a national database, so then we can then identify what risk factors you have. And this really ties into what I'd like to finish up on in this interview, and that's risk stratification and identification of risk factors. I am of Indian descent. I love taking part in research projects. We have found, even with the second and third generation diaspora, that we're still presenting with a prevalence of disease in diabetes, cardiovascular health, even though we've made various measures to, change our lifestyles and to have healthier lifestyle choices. this afternoon I'm going to give some blood for another research project, and it's a good way of getting everything checked
Absolutely.
at the same time. But where I'm going with this is that the risk stratification is very complex.
Okay.
We're appreciating the complexity when we're looking at artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence has given us a perspective that we didn't previously consider. This then identifies the aforementioned risk factors, which then goes into the risk stratification. That will then qualify a particular patient for choices that they can then decide upon with their primary care physician or with their cardiologist. So I think that the more we're learning and, the more that we're beginning to understand, it gives us healthy aging. So I think it's that's one of the demands that a lot of patients are putting upon us, is to have a certain quality of life as they age. And, you can see how personalised medicine and cardiac screening and, cardioprotective factors would be of interest to those individuals.
Absolutely. I mean, it sounds like it's all going in the right trajectory, at least. So do you think that that's, I guess, one of the main factors that people are seeking nowadays is obviously just that improved quality of life as they go down the track? Obviously, you talk about preventative measures. I think this all sounds like it kind of comes together in the services that your clinic provides in clinics around the world, right? Like that's the intention.
Yeah, I've considered what you're asking me from a different angle as well in recent months, where we've had some clients who have come to us for performance enhancement.
Okay.
So with this, we've seen a large percentage of the UK who are presenting with injury that you would see in, for example, professional athletes.
Right.
So the amateur athlete is training and certainly using equipment that's on par with professional athletes. And we're seeing that amateur athletes are presenting with, the same level of clinical decision making that would be needed to treat them as, as if they were an athlete. So I think individuals are looking for more from their health. So where initially we talked about preventative, I think that there is an element where an individual wants to be a better version of themselves.
It's a sense of elevation, right? They're trying to get better and better.
Absolutely. And I think that's what's always driven the human race, to be honest with you, is this constant competition with self in order to be better. But I think it's important to realize that, medication is used when there's a clinical threshold to be reached. So I think that the value of these particular medications is that they are administered in a clinical setting. It's not the same as nutritional supplements, where an individual would perhaps take some supplements with the hopes of enhancing their performance. This is a very different narrative.
Okay. In what sense, though? So obviously you're comparing the two, but I think from my understanding, a lot of people, like, let's say they are trying to get to the gym, you're trying to get healthier. Like, where does that difference lie? Obviously, I know coming into that clinical
I raised this question with a very high-profile cardiologist in recent months, and I said, at what point does healthy exercising become detrimental? At what point would you say that an individual should, in effect, exercise less?
Right.
And it's a very interesting conversation to be had, but generally I was told that the rule of thumb is 3 times the recommended becomes detrimental to one's health. So it's to do with the safety profile. So there are contraindications to the medication, individuals with thyroid conditions, for example, but that's why the decision is made with their primary care clinician.
Gotcha. Okay, yeah, so I mean, obviously there's a lot of considerations to take into place. Obviously you're looking for those lifestyle changes, but also not taking it so far that it is going to end up being detrimental to you, right? That's something that's really important. Amazing. Okay, well, I think it's been a really great conversation, to be honest. I'm definitely going to be taking a lot away from this. I think I need to rewatch it a couple of times just to really soak everything in. But I just want to thank you for coming in, and we're obviously very grateful and very hopeful for our relationship moving forward.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We'll be back next week with another episode of the Another Angle podcast. You can tune into this episode on all streaming platforms along with YouTube, where hopefully you are right now watching both of our beautiful faces on your screen.